Steve, in 2011, I remember ET Now interviewed you, and during our last interview, you described India as a country where the enthusiasm for technology is the highest in the world. You said there's a great deal of emphasis on education for the future, specifically maths and science. Between then and now, how do you think has India evolved?
That's interesting, because I don't remember using those sort of words. I go a lot of places in the country, and I see it's a lot of countries in the world, and I see people that are enthusiastic and inspired, and they have a passion, and they want to create new things. They want to do startups and innovation and creativity and be a part of the future and have startup companies. So when I see that, I kind of get that impression. Now, my impression of people from India is largely from, I'm not an anthropologist, it's largely from Indian people that I experience in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is full of people from India. Silicon Valley is one of 10 counties in the entire United States where more than half the people speak non-English at home. A lot of Urdu. And we all have dentists and doctors and lawyers and engineers all over, the smart people, so many smart people. So if you say that, technology and change and the future and new products and new companies comes from thinking and intelligence, India should rank very high. But there's also this little inspiration. I want to take risks. I want to go out and start something. And when you have very good education, a lot of countries that have that, well, you think, oh my gosh, I know my formula for life is satisfied. I'm going to have a good life. I'm going to have a Mercedes and all that. And sometimes the lack of wanting to be creative and do new things that haven't been done is a little lower.
Mm-hmm. You know, startup enthusiasts in India talk about creating a Silicon Valley here in India, talk about that culture, and a lot of them here as well. To your mind, what are the lessons that we can learn from Silicon Valley, that Indian startup entrepreneurs can learn from Silicon Valley?
First of all, Silicon Valley is looked at and admired a certain way everywhere in the world, but largely it was accidental. The founder of the transistor moved to Mountain View, California in about 1948 or something, and that was the technology. The transistor, with Moore's law, has led to all the products we have today. The entire technology ascension, starting at almost zero, going up and up and up and up, was based on the fact that Silicon Valley was one of the early places to get onto the transistor. A transistor company was formed. Some engineers split out to form a new transistor company. Engineers learned how to do it there, and they split another company, another company. All these spin-outs from companies grew and grew and grew, and it just happened to be in the area where, by luck, that was going to be the new hot technology. Just like if you went back 100 years before, it might have been the steel companies of out in the East, Pittsburgh and Cleveland and places. So that's where we are. Silicon Valley grew organically, is my point. It wasn't somebody thought out, here's what we should have, here's what we want, here's what we're going to create. It wasn't even necessarily that people thought differently, and that's why Silicon Valley grew where it was. It was more like Silicon Valley grew and people started thinking differently. I sort of see the opposite. So it's organic. That means you've got to kind of grow your own. You can't say, here's a formula, because every country of the world could have a city that says, here's the formula. We're going to have this investors and these facilities. One of the things that I see around the world is a lot of people trying to start Silicon Valleys. Well, the government is involved in basically setting up a lot of the government facilities to start a small city, based usually around a university or two, and cities which will have a lot of incubators to help start up, get the assistance and help they need. But money, everywhere you go in the world, there's money. The thing is, a lot of places, a lot of the people with money don't want to take the risks. Silicon Valley, we got over that decades ago. So in Silicon Valley, there are tons and tons of money people that want to invest in new companies, that's where they make their biggest money. Mm-hmm. So it really starts with a wanting and a passion. One thing I have found in my life, both in education, I taught in public schools for 8 years of my life, is that it doesn't matter what you know as much as you want to do things.
Mm-hmm. But how different is Silicon Valley today from what it was from the days of Apple and HP? The last couple of years have sort of shown the toxic side of the valley, issues at Uber, the Me Too movement, and also there's a lot of talk of power being concentrated in the hands of a few companies, Google, Apple, Facebook.
Silicon Valley got a name based on the silicon process that makes transistors and chips, the things that computers are made out of, the things that Moore's law is applied to. And we got our name around 1974, and Apple was starting 75 to 77. Back up until that time, the Silicon Valley was spin-outs of companies, a venture community that grew up, people that had made a lot of money, were willing to invest it back in new technology because they could understand technology. Now, personal computers came along, and young kids that never were in business before, Steve Jobs and myself, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, these young people coming out of college, Mark Zuckerberg eventually with Facebook, started companies, and it got a lot of popularity, and young people thought, oh my gosh, if you spot something before the big existing companies do, you can have your own presence in the world, your own startup. And over time, here's what happened. Now that was 4 decades ago, kind of. Over those decades, it became so popular for young people to try to be in startup companies. We've got a few big ones that control things, but people are starting to start companies, but it became software. In the early days, it was largely hardware, based on the silicon itself. Now, even though we call it Silicon Valley, it is a valley, surrounded by mountains. I grew up my whole life there when it was orchards everywhere, orchards of fruit trees. Silicon Valley was a valley. But now these people that call themselves Silicon Valley are anyone in the whole San Francisco Bay Area, a much huger place. Maybe 5 million people. Anybody who lives there calls themselves Silicon Valley if they're in electronics. And a lot of it is software. It's young people saying, I'm going to write down a business plan. I'm going to get it funded. And then I'm going to buy myself a house in San Francisco. And then I'm going to start another company and start another one. And it's less focus on, I want to create a great product. It's kind of one at a time. And the engineers aren't as involved. Silicon Valley grew up with the name silicon, hardware, transistors, chips. These are engineering things. Grew up with engineers. And now a lot of the people that move up to San Francisco just want to write software. There's no silicon. And when it comes time to get the code written, I have a business plan. I'm a businessman. I will hire the engineers. They could be in India. They could be in Russia. They could be in Mexico. They could be anywhere in the world. And that's wrong, because you should have the engineers involved in defining your early startup, your product and your services, because engineers are so advanced at solving problems and thinking about them. Also, you should have somebody who's a builder involved. I tell people, hey, if you're going to start a company, don't just have an idea on paper. There could be 100,000 people around the world with the same idea on paper. You should have a working model before you seek money, and a working model means some engineer involved with you should be in the startup team.
Mm-hmm. But do you believe that power is concentrated in the hands of these 3-4 companies now?
Yeah, the few big companies now have a lot of power concentrated in them, but there were a lot of big companies when we started Apple. Digital Equipment Corporation, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, Varian. There were all these companies around, and they sort of said, these personal computers are never going to be useful. They're never going to amount to much. They aren't worth much. So it's hard to tell that there isn't room for newcomer with a new idea. Some of the big companies might even be subject to sort of being displaced by a newer technology that's better, but they have an advantage. These big companies are so huge now, the Amazons and PayPals and Googles and Apples, so huge, they have huge savings accounts. A huge savings account means if things are being disrupted in a new direction, we can just buy some companies in that direction and not be obsoleted, not be disrupted. Or we can have a failure. Total product fails. And if you have enough money, you can keep buying more attempts. You can buy out of a lot of failures. So I don't expect the big companies to go away very soon. Some of their services might be someday displaced, but it would be by something very different than today's business models.
Mm-hmm. A question that I'm sure a lot of people in the audience want to know from you is, can we really reclaim the control and privacy that we've lost to some of these companies, to some of these platforms? We're being profiled every second based on the apps we download, the sites we visit, things we browse. Can we reclaim our privacy?
What's more important, the human or the technology? Unfortunately, the technology taking away from our privacy, it's like the technology is winning against the way we used to deal human to human and be able to have privacy and secrets. And I believe very much in civil liberties. You should have the privacy that you think you have. I sent a message to somebody, and later on it comes back and it embarrasses me and gets burned. I should have the privacy I think I have. And that's largely gone away, and it goes away gradually, and you don't notice it, and then you just accept the status quo. So I don't think it's going to be coming back too soon. Some of the privacy that bothers me, though, is everything I do, every place I go, every comment I make in email, everything is being accumulated by people like Google and Facebook and Amazon, not Apple. All these other companies, Apple just makes good products. Apple makes good products. But it's being, my information about my life is being accepted by others, and they know it's me, Steve Wozniak. It is my information. And they target ads and they sell the advertising, and I don't get a bit of money for my information that I gave them that it's worth all this money. I don't get a cent of it back. And I'm hoping that that would change in the future, and it would obviously require a different business model, probably based on blockchain.
Mm-hmm. That takes me back to your sort of formative years, and I'm sure the audience here would love to know, how did your sort of formative years lay the foundation for what was to come? This interest in engineering, how did you develop that?
Accidents in life often lead us to some of the great inventions of our time and whatnot. I had accidents in my own life that I stumbled into things I should have never learned. I was so advanced in mathematics, winning all the math awards in my schools, and I was advanced in engineering, the old analog engineering, ham radio license, 10 years old, where you have to learn all the mathematics formulas of how electrons flow through wires and other devices and do incredible calculations to build circuits. You build it soldering wires together, built huge projects. So I got into that, but the biggest accident of all was there were no books describing what a computer was or how they worked. I found a journal in the hall closet. My father was an engineer at Lockheed Martin. A journal, and it started describing how ones and zeros were the mathematics of computers. I sat down on paper, writing ones and zeros and teaching myself how to add them and subtract them. And I read other articles on little logic gates that made decisions like light switches and how they could be combined up to add numbers and things. And I said, oh my gosh, you don't have to be old. You don't have to have any advanced mathematics. If you're 10 years old, you have enough math to totally understand all the stuff that computers are made of. And that's true to this day, except for the radios, which are still old analog electronics. And I said, I'm going to love this for the rest of my life. I did not think there were jobs in computers. I just wanted to know how to design these things and how to make them and put pieces together, starting with transistors. I could never afford a chip. Eventually, by high school, I stumbled onto a manual that described the insides of a computer, the architecture, like the architecture of this room. And what are the pieces that this room is made out of? Well, I sat down saying, back in elementary school, I did all these science fair projects with hundreds of little logic gates making decisions. Could I, on paper, draw in the logic that will make a computer? And it took me months at first. It's not easy the first time through. And eventually I taught myself how to design a computer. And I got books of the chips that were made. And I started designing better and better and better with fewer and fewer and fewer chips. And I would design every computer that I could get a manual for. IBM computers, Varian computers, digital equipment computers, HP computers, digital equipment, Data General. I loved these machines. And I told my father, okay, a computer with switches and lights for ones and zeros, I understood totally. But I wanted to write programs like I had in high school and college. I wanted to type program into a computer. So I told my dad, someday I am going to have a 4K mini computer. 4K is the minimum computer memory to have a programming language that you can type programs in. My father said with the I/O, it would cost as much as a house. And I was stunned at the kitchen table, and I said, I'll live in an apartment. That's what I'm talking about, want. If I ever had a formula to own my own computer, I wanted it. I didn't think it was going to be for a job or anything. It was like, oh, if I saw a puzzle in a store, I could turn the puzzle into numbers, write a program, and have the computer solve the puzzle. These were some of my joys in life. And finally, I did see the formula in my head kind of one night, all the right pieces that I followed all day long. I had a job as an engineer without a college degree. Design engineer for Hewlett-Packard, designing the hottest product in the world, the early Hewlett-Packard handheld calculators. They interviewed me and hired me on the spot because I knew how to design anything. I'd done so much in my life. And here I was. So I had, so I had a job, but all of a sudden I was following the parts and I saw this is the formula to have my 4K computer that will keep me happy for the rest of my life. Anything that comes up in life, you can always make a program, make another program, make another program. You can make infinite programs, and if that's your joy in life, your passion, you'll never be let down once you have that first computer.
Indeed.
So I was going to make it. And by the way, I was inspired. I was inspired by professors of universities meeting every 2 weeks in a club about this size, people throwing out ideas of how our own computers were going to change the world. We'd be able to communicate with each other so fast, and we'd be able to educate better, and the geek who knew how to program would be worth more than the CFO in a company for calculating strategies. And I just wanted to do that. So I built the computer, my first computer. Didn't really design it as a computer. I hastily modified a terminal I had built, because I like interesting things, to get on the early ARPANET when only 6 computers were on it. MIT, Stanford Research Institute, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, and a couple others. I had to be on it, so I built a terminal that worked over modem phone lines. I hastily modified it, so instead of typing to a computer over a modem, I typed into my own little microprocessor computer, and I built this thing up, and I was a hero in the club showing it off every 2 weeks. I gave away my designs for free. I wanted to help the revolution happen. We were using the new word revolution, and I wanted to help all these other people see a design that for $300 they could build a useful computer. And then eventually Steve Jobs came into town, and I said, you got to come down to the club. I'm going to show you the excitement. Don't believe a movie that shows him taking me down. I was the one who took him to the club. He'd never been there. I took him down. Well, hold on. And people like to go back and change history to fit their images later on. But he came down, he saw all the interest, and he said, we should start a company, not to build a computer. It was to build a part of the computer. And we'd build it for 20 bucks, sell it for 40 bucks, and that was the start, except that I wouldn't do it because I wanted my company, Hewlett-Packard, to build the personal computer. And I proposed it to them and told them what it would be, and I showed them demos, and they turned me down for the first of 5 times.
Oh, God.
Hewlett-Packard, big companies that were in the business just couldn't see that this was going to be valuable. So heck, that let Steve Jobs and I start our company.
Since you brought up Steve Jobs, I'm sure this is a question that you get asked a lot. How would you define your relationship with Steve Jobs during the early years? Were both of you aligned on your vision, on the way of doing things, on your strategy?
Okay. I knew Steve Jobs for 5 years before Apple. He did not know the insides of a computer, the hardware or the software, didn't really know how to design stuff and create it, but he knew how to look at products and tell what was good, what was bad, what it should be. He was able to use a soldering iron, but he just didn't have the step that you take to become an engineer instead of a technician. And the day I met him, I showed him all the Bob Dylan albums. He was young, he was 16 years old and didn't have any. I showed him all the liner notes. We became Bob Dylan fans. We went to concerts, we drove long distances to see brochures and pictures about Bob Dylan. And we played pranks, and we did jokes, and we drove places, and I'd go over to his house, and his parents would have me for dinner, and nice family, and we were just normal, totally normal kids. We played jokes and pranks, we told jokes, we laughed at things, and we were talking about philosophies of life. Steve was, wanted to live the zero money life because he didn't have much. I had a job. I would never have to worry about money in my life to some extent. But I was very favorable towards the counterculture thinking that was going on in the San Francisco area in the 1960s, around that time. And it was, we can live life different ways. And I was an engineer with my feet on the ground. I wasn't going to be a hippie using drugs, but I admired that people thought about life a different way. Steve was more like a true hippie, eating seeds out of a package and trying to find his way through nothing. And you know what? A lot of young people do that. And I admire him. Now, I was so shy, I had almost nobody in the world I could talk to. One person that would talk to me, even understood me, was a best friend, to me. That's how it was. So we were very good friends and got along very well. Once we started Apple, now my personality had already been settled. I thought out a whole bunch of inside rules that I would live by for the rest of my life. Didn't have a church or a religion, But I thought out rules, you know, it involved, don't have conflict, don't argue, don't judge, don't be judgmental. If somebody's bad to you, you are good to them. Honesty is the most important thing in life. I had a framework, and I've lived with it to this day. I would never give it up. Steve hadn't, thank you. Also a lot about equality, and we're all the same in the world. People ask me where I'm from. I say I'm from planet Earth. And sometimes people say it's a little like Buddhism, but I don't know Buddhism well enough to say for sure. Now, Steve was searching for, well, a lot of the kind of like hippies go do, and thinking for ways to, he wanted to be an important person in the world. You can't be an important person unless you kind of run a company and get money. And once a year, he'd come into town and see what I had designed, and he would always turn it into money for both of us. For a while, he got a job at Atari, and I got to design a game for Atari, one of the most precious opportunities in my life. So Steve was always seeing what I was building, the terminal to contact all these other computers. And then when I built the first little computer, which became the Apple I, and when I built the real great computer, the Apple II, I owned it myself. I'd done everything, hardware, software. That was the computer that was going to create an industry. That was the computer that was going to create a company. It was going to be all of Apple's revenues for the first 10 years of Apple. One product. And that's why I say build a working prototype before you get money. We had the prototype all there. Our investor said, here's the money I'm putting in, and you don't have an option. You have to work here a number of years. Heck, I was afraid of politics. I'd get kicked out. I was non-political. I would never vote for a president in my life, at least not somebody that could win. It's just, you know, part of my things was not to be hung up by all these things that bother people in the world. So I was, so when we started, it was kind of nice that he said, we'll have stock. We don't have options. We don't have to live up to it and earn it by staying there, because I'd get kicked out or something. I'm not political, and I didn't want to run a company. Running a company, you have people jockeying for position and telling other people how to do things and doing that. I'm not like that. I just want to go create good hardware and good software, and I was so needed. So I just got to go in the laboratory and be an engineer. And at first I turned down the money and wouldn't take it. Now Steve Jobs changed around then. Right at that time, his personality, he was 20, 21. His personality is solidifying. It usually happens 18 to 23 years old, and you become the person you're going to be forever. And he said, oh my gosh, this was his chance in life. He had no academic background and no work background that would get him to be one of those important people, but now he was founder of a company that had big money, and he said, I'm going to be in a suit, I'm going to be on the cover of the magazines, and I am going to be acknowledged as the person that created these great personal computers. And that was great. He deserves that. You know, I can design a machine, but you need somebody like Steve Jobs to turn it into a product and to market it and convince people to buy it and handle all those details from parts to sales to pricing and all that. And our investor ran marketing. He was very good. We had an adult. Steve and I were young kids. We didn't know how to run a company. So our investor told us, here's who you hire, and here's what each of their responsibilities are, president and accounting and operations and technicians, and here's the sort of people you hire, and here's what their jobs are. So we learned. And Steve was a good learner of every little thing about the company, and I was great at engineering.
Right. Do you think entrepreneurs often make the mistake of modeling themselves around the Jobs who left Apple, who was sort of arrogant and brash in some sense, and not so much with the Jobs when he returned, you know, and he was sort of far more humble and sort of far more down to earth in some sense? Do you think entrepreneurs make that mistake, and that's when he got a lot of success?
In my travels and my reading, online technology, blogs and journals and things, there are an awful lot of people, there are 1 million people that think, oh, you could just be kind of a nobody and just think weirdly and you can make things. But remember that Steve Jobs tried to create computer after computer after computer inside of Apple, and all he did was fail. He failed every time, sometimes for marketing reasons, usually because he didn't know the technology involved and what it would cost and how to make it right. Macintosh wasn't really even a computer. It was just a program to look, to Steve Jobs' eyes, like a computer should look. And later we had to kind of hash things on and not have a true operating system. So many years later we had to buy a real operating system from Steve. So I think a lot of people that way. Now in my travels, I run into a lot more people that don't bring it up that way really so much. But they really like that. Steve Jobs, who was a wild character, they didn't see the bad sides of his personality. There were an awful lot of times that he did things to people that if your own child ever did, you would never want them to ever grow up that way. And if you saw anybody do them, you'd say, how could a person be so insensitive? how could a person do those things? So there are an awful lot, but you don't get to see those. Not very many of them, because they aren't in front of the press.
One thing that stands out about you is that, and sort of evident in this interaction, is that you never really cared much about money, and yet you've been very successful financially as well. So what's the trick that you'd give this wonderful audience in terms of a philosophy towards money?
Different people are different. My philosophy was life is not about achievement that's measured by money. It's about happiness of just smiling and versus frowns, entertainment, joking, movies. It could be concerts and music, but always have a lot of fun. Make jokes, make pranks, and minus frowns. Happiness is smiles minus frowns. Don't get so worried about politics or business or following stocks every day. It's just going to make you less happy. And what was the question?
Your philosophy on money.
Philosophy of money. My money, yeah. So when we started Apple, I was the only one that wasn't after, oh, you can get a bunch of money from this. And there were three founders of the second time we started Apple. 3 founders, and we all owned it equally. Steve Jobs, myself, and our investor, Mike Markkula. But I had never thought it was so much more money than we could ever want in our lives. And then 10 times that, and then 10 times that. It was just so unreal, and I didn't want to be one of those people. I had decided when I was young, talking to my father, I just wanted to be like in the middle, pretty much. And I found wonderful people that wanted to start museums for children, museums for technology, arts groups for the community. In the city I was born in, I invested in all those projects at a very early time. I didn't say, I'm going to take my money and my wealth, my money and power, I'm just going to make more and more money and more power, like most people do. I didn't really want to be that person. So most people do. Some people can get very much of their happiness from it. So I got rid of a lot of my money over time, and then a couple of divorces helped. And so I kind of got down to where I had to borrow money. And you know what? I had not used my passport in 10 years, but I had a friend who was speaking around the world, calling me from all these exotic places, and I said, wow, and he introduced me to his speech agent, and that's when I started speaking, because I can communicate messages, and I really like to be heard by younger people, especially high school and university students, because that's the time that my life, took so much of its framing. And I've also gotten involved in a lot of other startups and businesses, some technology startups, some popular culture like Silicon Valley Comic-Con and Tokyo Comic-Con.
Right.
And now I have a dream. It started about 5 years ago, a university with my name on it, Technology University, WazU. But when I started it 5 years ago, I was offered a lot of money, but it wasn't to have a WazU, it was just to give a bunch of my speaking to students in videos, and I turned it down. I turned all the money down. That wasn't what I was after. And then another group that had a great university they had developed, the most popular one in the Phoenix area, came to me, and they wanted to really do the WazU, and they listened to my ideas about how it should be run, and that you should focus on the things that you're good at and you want to, and not a lot of side subjects that bother you. And what we do is with WazU is we keep in touch with industry and what their needs are for technology, and we train the students in the modern technology that will get them jobs. And we have an incredible high employment rate, and we're brand new, we're less than a year old.
A lot of people compare Steve Jobs with Elon Musk, and you recently said on Musk that he often doesn't deliver on the hype. Do you see similarities between them, if any?
Steve Jobs and Elon Musk were very good salesmen in their sense, and very good speakers, and could convince you of things you had. Generally, Steve Jobs delivered, sometimes a little late. Elon Musk, almost every time I bought a Tesla, I bought it thinking I had one thing and found out, no, I had less than that. And then I bought the next one, thinking I had a car that would drive itself across the country by the end of 2016. Whoa, that's a fantastic idea that a car could someday drive itself. And no, they had to fire their sensor company because it could never do it, put in new sensors with 8 cameras, and now the car could drive itself across the country by the end of 2017. And no, it can't. And now the car that we have, they're putting in new higher power processors, and they're only going to write the software that works in that. So I don't believe that they're ever going to have a car anyway, maybe any company, at least for decades, that will really drive itself level 5 autonomous driving all by itself with no human inside. I'm not sure that's going to happen except in very specific, well-known, constrained areas where nothing is different than it's trained for. It's like, you show Google 80,000 pictures of a dog and it knows what a dog is, 80,000 pictures of this highway, 80,000 pictures of this sign, this light. I mean, even seeing a stoplight is hard for a human when the sun is in the background. So there's a lot of changes that are going to have to be made in the infrastructure, and it's not going to go as fast as they think. And I believe that Tesla, despite all of its credibility, by the way, you watch movies and TV shows, they always make fun of Elon Musk for not being believable. And Tesla seems to be way behind all the other companies for self-driving cars. Yes, they don't have a self-driving car. Oh, they say we have automatic cruise control. Wait a minute, I've had that since 2004. They say, oh, we have automatic steering. No, you don't. You have a human that says, I'm beta test, I have to sign away. Any accidents are my fault. I have to be the one responsible. That's not self-steering. So they don't even have that, and yet there's other companies that have cars continually drive all by themselves all over the place, you know, with the LiDAR attachments on top and all.
Another reason why people admire you is your ability to spot breakthrough innovation, and talking about that, obviously blockchain and Bitcoin. And people here, I'm sure, are envious of the fact that you invested in Bitcoin when it was about $700, and you got out of it at its peak. So how did you know when to buy, and more importantly, how did you know when to sell?
No. I first tried to buy Bitcoin when it was 70. I bought something around 300. I did not invest in Bitcoin. You said invest. Never. I don't invest. I don't have any stocks except for Apple stock. I've never used Apple's stock app on my iPhone. I don't want to follow things up and down and care about them every day. That's the thing that makes you frown. So I had a bunch of Bitcoin, and the reason I had it was so that I could someday travel and not use credit cards or wallet or cash. I could do it all on Bitcoin. I studied how to find which restaurants and which hotels and which facilities accepted Bitcoin. It's very difficult to do still. I also wanted to buy things online and trade Bitcoin online, and I managed to go through a lot of those steps. I did it to experiment. And then all of a sudden it went so up in value. I had kind of a small fortune that I did not make from investing, and I didn't want to watch the price every day. Is it 20,000? Is it 18,000? Is it 15? I didn't want to watch it anymore, so I sold all my Bitcoin except one. It's enough to experiment with. And then I discovered I also had bought some Ethereum when it was new, I guess for zero. I had a reason, I guess, and I forgot I had it. So I made another fortune on that one, and I sold it all. Because I don't want to follow it. I'm not an investor, but I do want to study it, watch it, and see how it works. Now, Bitcoin to me originally was a currency that is not manipulated by governments. It is mathematical, it is pure, it can't be altered. The blockchain everywhere identifies who has what Bitcoin, every transaction's ever been done. It doesn't mean there can't be fraud. I had 7 Bitcoin stolen from me through fraud. Somebody bought out this one little bank, online wallet's Bitcoin, bought it all out with credit card, and then canceled the credit card payment. That easy, and it was stolen credit card numbers, so you can never get it back. So Bitcoin is that, but I look at it more. Blockchain. What is this blockchain? It is a technology that all over the world I'm seeing people take applications that want to keep track of everything in healthcare and purchasing systems and where materials come from, and just track everything in the world. I'm hoping someday it'll displace Facebook, and I can say, I'm going to give you my data, but you have to pay me this much if you ever use it. I'm hoping blockchain could have a solution to that. Blockchain, there's no central company that runs the thing. It just, once it gets out there, and Ethereum is a platform, like our computers are platforms. You can build a lot of applications on one platform. And Ethereum is designed to be a whole system of code that you can adapt to your own applications. So I think that one I'm finding has more value, I think, for the future than even Bitcoin. But I'm hoping for the best. I think it's going to go very slowly. Right now, you don't see very many blockchain applications really taking off. You don't even necessarily say Bitcoin taking off, other than we're all aware of it. Use some real critical use that you've got to have it. So where is it happening? I think back to the early start of the internet. Oh, we imagine that someday on the internet, you're going to do all your restaurants and your airline reservations and your time schedules for trains, and you're going to do all your purchasing and everything. Everything's going to be internet. And all the investment got done. Investment. The huge bubble collapsed. 2003 was the only year that San Jose, 10th largest city in the United States, lost population. 2003 because of the .com crash. That was wonderful. I was so glad for that crash because so many people lost jobs and moved out of the area and went to other things, that the traffic got good. You could drive any time of day and night. It was beautiful. Now it's horrible again, so the economy is up.
Since you spoke about jobs, I'm sure everyone wants to know, what's your outlook on the future of jobs, given the way artificial intelligence is going to come in a larger way? What's your sense on how jobs will be 5 years, 10 years down the line?
Well, there are a lot of things that take jobs that exist and they disappear. Sometimes companies just fail because they're not competitive. Sometimes the jobs get shifted offshore to some other country. Sometimes the jobs get replaced by machines. Well, obviously there's people that have to run the machines and make the machines and design the machines and engineering. I'll tell you, if you go into materials handling as a college curriculum, university curriculum, you've got it made. There are so many jobs in that category. Now, we've been replacing people with machines since, I don't know, at least 200 years ago. Manchester, England, where they learned to make real cheap cloth and clothing, in a factory setting. And from then on, then we learned to make cars with, industrial automation and all that. And now we've got robots doing a lot of that work. All this change has been going on. Where do the jobs don't disappear? There's kind of jobs for most everyone when the economy is good. Economies have ups and downs. So I don't really see any reason to say, why should all the jobs disappear just because we can see a place where one job might get replaced by a machine. There'll be a lot more jobs building those machines. There will be social displacement. People without jobs, people needing to be taken care of, they don't have an income, and that's a horrible thing. I wish they were taken care of better, but in the end, the next generation has just different types of jobs. The types of jobs shift. It doesn't happen rapidly. It's, all of a sudden a lot of people lose their job. You can't instantly find a new job necessarily. All you can do is complain.
Right. Before I take questions from this audience, and I'm sure all of you have some questions, I'm going to, we played a rapid fire with Shah Rukh Khan, so I think since you're a legend, I think I'm going to try my luck with a quick rapid fire round with you as well. Have you ever used a phone that's not Apple? You used Google, Samsung?
Many times, all the time. I carry a lot of
phones. So which is your favorite non-Apple phone?
Pixel 2, Google Pixel 2. Hands down. And I've been through so many Android phones, and I see, ever since the Galaxy S3, I really wouldn't look at people and say, you have a lousy phone. And some people in Apple didn't like me saying those sort of things, but I like to experiment. I'm a technology experimenter. I like to buy. I have about 10 phones maybe, and I like to buy them, and I like to try all the different carriers. I've got 5 carriers in the United States, and I just like to compare things that way. Personal. I don't like to do it by reading things, and I find which phones kind of feel good and fit me well. And I'm an iPhone person, but I definitely like other products as well, and sometimes they actually save me.
The best piece of technology that you've ever owned?
Best piece of technology I've ever owned is, I'm going to say my MacBook Pro computer. I'm tending towards my latest one, the Apple Watch. I can't explain. I do not like middlemen in anything. I don't like middlemen in economies. Any steps you can cut out, you have improved the world and made it more efficient. And that's what engineering's about. And I don't like the extra steps of even taking a phone out of my pocket if I can do it on my watch. Hey Siri, text Janet. Thank you. And after you use it over and over, and Apple Pay is one of the most beautiful ones. All my airline, my boarding passes and my movie tickets are all on the watch. And it's so convenient I can even forget my phone now, and the watch has a cell phone built in. So this Apple Watch has just turned out to, when I first bought it, I was skeptical. The news was, I was saying, oh, I didn't think this watch was so good. You needed your phone anyway, and the phone does it better with a bigger screen. That's what I said. I tested it, and after a week or two, this watch became a permanent part of my life. It does so many things for me. Texting my wife, looking up information, even navigation.
The biggest myth about your relationship with Steve Jobs?
The biggest myth about my relationship with Steve Jobs, that we were very different or fighting or something like that. We never had a fighting or an argument that anybody saw ever. We had a couple of disagreements, maybe 2 over all time. He treated me with respect and as a friend right to his death. We weren't doing the same things in the company. I do engineering, he would run the company. He wanted that, I wanted this. And we both understood each other well. He was more respectful to me than other people. When you were a good engineer in Steve Jobs' life, or something important to him, or you even had a life that went back before Apple, you very often got into a very good category of his, and he treated you with a lot of respect, and even if you couldn't answer questions well, he wouldn't treat you like, you don't even know what you're talking about.
Last question, favorite entrepreneur today and why?
Favorite entrepreneur today and why? It's difficult because we read about a few famous ones, and there's probably ones that are more like I was, going into the laboratory and hooking up and wiring and hooking things and building things and being a real inventor today. And the trouble is, I'm just not close to those. So I only read what we all read. And I like Elon Musk very much as an inventor, despite the fact that he can sell me a lot of stuff that I think I'm getting and I'm not. And truth is important to me. He has the vision. How do you change the world to go from gasoline cars that put out some dirty substances to electric cars that don't? I was an electrical engineer. I loved replacing mechanics like hard disks with motors. I love replacing it with little electronic chips with electrons running around. It's so much more efficient. So I'm into electronics and electric cars, but who would ever have built a large electric car? Engineers study it and come up with, you've got to build the car small to be affordable, small batteries, limited distance, only around town. Elon Musk had a large family, like 5 kids. He had to build a large car. It turned out to be the right luxury model. A luxury car that was large, took over the world. I loved that car so much. And so it was really built for himself, but more than the car. The car wouldn't have helped him. A car that has a 300-mile range wouldn't have helped Elon Musk in his life because it's like 400 miles to drive from his house to the factory. So the supercharger stations out on the road, drive for 2 hours, charge for half an hour, drive for 3 hours, charge for half an hour. Whatever it is, those superchargers make it possible to do everything you ever did in a gas car, no sacrifice. And the first 6 supercharger stations were between Elon Musk's home and the factory. I have always found that when you design a good product that will work for you, it often is the best. Those are the best products of everything when other people discovered that there are a lot of people that wanted those same things. And now Tesla got involved in building, they've lost a lot of money continually. Why? They're building these supercharger stations all over. You can drive anywhere in the United States. You can drive into Yellowstone National Park now and there's a supercharger in the middle of it. I mean, everywhere you want to go, these chargers are here. I talked to the engineers of the second car that has a big battery that's available in the United States, the Chevy Volt EV, which I have one, and I love it, and I drive it every day instead of the Tesla. But I talked to the engineers, and they said, I said, are you using the Tesla superchargers? And they said, no, we just build an electric car. We leave charging to other people. And I said, oh my gosh. Elon Musk saw the formula. You need the car, you need the chargers. The batteries are such a critical element to having an advantage over your competition. So the lead that they have in building the superchargers, nobody's going to catch up.